Western society is crumbling as it moves further and further away from the Christian values and principles that it was founded on, and I think the opening ceremony of the Paris Olympics is symptomatic of that, because in it they reenacted Da Vinci's famous painting of the Last Supper using transgender and drag artists, and here is what the creative director of the whole thing had to say about it.
En France, la création artistique est libre, c'est le premier article de la loi sur la liberté de création. J'en profite, comme d'autres libertés en France, dans ce pays, on a la chance de ça.
Now, a lot has been said about how this was disrespectful to Christians, about how other religions would never have been mocked in this way, and I think that's true. But what I think is interesting though, and why I think this is symptomatic of a bigger cultural trend, is that the very values that allow people to do this sort of thing and facilitate it happening are entirely Christian. It is a Christian worldview which gives birth to the freedoms that these people are celebrating. In the West, and I confine this to the West because I'm not really in the know about cultural trends across the world, but in the West we believe in things like freedom, charity, kindness, compassion, the value of the individual, the rights of the individual. That gives birth to democracy. That's very much a given in the Western culture, and in France, here's again what Thomas Joly had to say.
En France, on a le droit de s'aimer comme on veut, avec qui on veut. En France, on a le droit de croire ou de ne pas croire. En France, on a le droit, on a beaucoup de droits, voilà.
But as our culture shifts away from the Christian heritage, then we risk losing the things like kindness, charity and compassion, etc. It's as if we are sitting on the branch of a tree, enjoying the fruit, but then saying, you know, we don't need the tree anymore. We've outgrown it. It's antiquated, it's outdated, it's restrictive, and so we're going to chop down the tree. The irony there is you can't have the security of the branch and the goodness of the fruit without the foundation of the tree. But that is what we in the West are trying to do. We're trying to get rid of Christianity, but we want to hold on to the love and compassion and charity and goodness and all of those things which come from a Christian worldview. Hence, a performance by a community of people who say that they value love, respect and tolerance, but their performance was dismissive and intolerant and bigoted. Even the apology statement wasn't really an apology. It was more of a, we're sorry that you feel offended, rather than we're sorry that we offended you. There's a huge difference there. Oh, and by the way, if you're enjoying this so far, please hit it with a like so it can spread to more people. Thanks. That leaves us thinking, well, what do we do about this? Do we show the same dismissiveness and disrespect and bigotry back at these people? That's how many people have responded, unfortunately, but I want to look at how we might respond to this in a biblical way. Obviously, it is only natural to be angry. Our faith was disrespected, Jesus was mocked, and the apology wasn't really an apology. But I always find the words of James on anger to be really helpful. He says in chapter 1 verse 20 of his letter that human anger does not produce the righteousness that God desires. So it's as if anger can be beneficial, it can be a good thing and produce good results, but there is a type of anger, human anger, that we tend towards which is not beneficial, and it does not produce the righteousness God desires. And you know that's true because our anger tends to be disproportionate. It's way over the top compared to what we are acting against. It's retaliatory. Instead of trying to rectify the wrong and trying to right what was broken, we're just wanting to get back at people. And then it's also often unmeasured. There's no self-control in it. We just kind of lash out. So then thinking about our anger and the Olympic opening ceremony, you gotta ask, well, who would we be angry at? Would we be angry at the performers who were given this piece to do and performed it? Or should we be angry at the creative team behind the whole thing who cooked it up? Or maybe the people who rubber stamped it and said, yep, that's okay, let's go with that? Or maybe we should be angry at the general public who saw it and were aware of what it was about and are still okay with it. Well, I want to use the language of Ephesians when I say that those people, the people who don't honour and respect Jesus and don't care about him being disrespected, those people are dead in their transgressions and sins. They follow the ways of this world and of the ruler of the kingdom of the air who's at work in them. They've given themselves over to sin, as we all did before we came to know Jesus. But our struggle isn't against these people. It's against the spiritual forces which hold them captive and keep them in darkness. In John 18, whenever Jesus is arrested, he tells Peter not to retaliate and fight back and defend him with the sword. And then whenever he is having a conversation with Pontius Pilate, he says, my kingdom's not of this world. If it was, my followers would use violence to promote it and to protect it, but instead they don't. And then Paul kind of builds on this idea in 2 Corinthians 10 when he says these words. He says, though we live in the world, we do not wage war as the world does. The weapons we fight with are not the weapons of the world. On the contrary, they have divine power to demolish strongholds. We demolish arguments and every pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge of God, and we take captive every thought to make it obedient to Christ. Our enemies are not the people, but the spiritual forces of evil which keep those people in bondage to sin and keep them living out their sinful nature. And so instead of raging against them, I think we should pray for them in the same way that Jesus prayed for his executioners when he said, Father, forgive them, they don't know what they're doing. And I know that this seems like a counterintuitive way to push back against offense and mockery and blasphemy, because we live in an age of internet rage and abuse, and the voices that win are often just the people who are the loudest. But let's not underestimate the power of prayer and the power of Christ-like love to transform individuals, and then from that to shift the tides in culture. Because whenever we look at what God is doing in the West, we see some really exciting stuff. On Easter Sunday this year in France, the country that gave birth to this opening ceremony, where 50% of people say they don't believe in God, there were over 12,000 adults and teenagers baptized. Across Europe, the UK, the US, Australia, there are whispers of revival. I was at a Christian festival this year. There were 2,000 young people at it, and over 200 of them gave their lives to Jesus. And then over 100 of them who feel called to some sort of ministry went forward and received prayer for that. 100 of them out of 2,000. We've also got celebrities like Russell Brand, or public intellectuals like Jordan Peterson, even like atheists like Richard Dawkins, or influencers like Joe Rogan coming out and saying that Christianity is a good thing. It is a force for redemptive good in the world, even if they don't believe it, although some are coming to believe it. People are seeing the good and the value in Christianity. And I think this is especially true of the younger generation who've grown up in a world where God was kind of dismissed and ignored for a long time, and then they've experienced that world without God. They've seen the mess it's made of the world. They've experienced the ramifications in their mental health and their sense of purpose and identity and value, and so they're making noises about following Jesus. They're seeing the goodness in Jesus. And so if the Olympic opening ceremony mocked Jesus for a couple of minutes, I don't think he's particularly worried. Now granted, that is blasphemy. That mockery will be punished. Either the punishment will be paid by Jesus or by the people who carried out the sin. That's the way that all sin works. But let's be people who fight spiritual battles with spiritual weapons. Now, if you want an example of a younger person who sees the value in faith and Jesus, even though they're LGBT and you would think would be predisposed to not wanting Jesus, then you can watch this video here. But see you there. God bless.